In this video, we will start with the basics of complex number. Let's start off with the idea of a quadratic equation of the general form y is equals to ax square plus bx plus c. The quadratic formula is x is equals to minus b plus minus b square minus 4ac, the whole thing divided by 2a. There is a square root on top of b square minus 4ac. The expression b square minus 4ac is known as the discriminant because it discriminates based upon the roots of equation. Roots, x-intercepts, and solution of equation, they all mean the same thing. We know that if the discriminant is positive, we end up with two solutions. Why? Because there is a positive and a negative sign before the square root. Now, if we go back to b square minus 4ac, what if the value is 0? We end up with one solution because square root of 0 is 0. What if b square minus 4ac is negative? We say there are no real solution because we cannot take square root of a negative number. That is what we have studied so far. Now let's start with the square root of a negative number such as negative 16. Using the rule of indices, a, b raised to power of m, that is a power m, b power m. I can write 16 as 16 multiplying with negative 1, and now I am raising it to a power of half. So I can write this thing as 16 power half and negative 1 power half. So this is 16 square root. That's the same thing as power half. And this is square root of negative 1. Now that is the beginning of complex number. Square root of negative 1 is defined as the symbol I. I stands for the imaginary part. And I is known as iota. So therefore, square root of minus 1 is denoted as I, and square root of 16 is denoted as plus minus 4. So altogether, what we have is a complex number. So now, the square root of a negative number gives rise to a complex number. In general, we can say that z is a complex number, and a complex number is made up of two parts, a plus bi. A is known as the real part of complex number, and b, the number attached to I, this is known as the imaginary part of a complex number. They both add up to give us z, which is a complex number. So I can also say that the real part of z is a. Re stands for real. Imaginary, im stands for imaginary. Imaginary part of z is b. Now let's write down few complex number such as z is equals to 3 plus 4i, w equals to minus 1 plus 2i. For z, the real part of z is 3. The imaginary part of z is 4. For w, the real part of w is negative 1. The imaginary part of w is positive 2. So the complex number we have seen so far has a real part, imaginary part, real part, imaginary part. What if the complex number z1 is written as 0 plus 2i, the real part of z1 is 0. The imaginary part of this complex number z1 is 2. Similarly, if we have another complex number z2, something like 3 plus 0i. So real part of z2 is 3. Imaginary part of z2 is 0. Now this first example of z1, this is purely an imaginary number because the real part is 0. Similarly, this particular one, z2, that is purely a real number because the imaginary part is 0. Now let's talk about the addition and subtraction of two complex numbers. It's the same principle as in algebra. We add the x to the x, we add the y to the y. In this case, we add the real part to the real part. Similarly, we add the imaginary part to the imaginary part. Whatever is the rule for addition, that same rule applies for subtraction also. For example, if I say z is 3 plus 4i and w is minus 1 plus 2i, if I add z and w, so 3 plus 4i is being added to minus 1 plus 2i. This is the real part of z. This is the real part of w. These two will be added, so 3 plus negative 1. Similarly, we will add the imaginary part to the imaginary part of z being added to imaginary part of w. So plus sign in the middle, 4i plus 2i. So overall, the answer comes out to be 3 plus negative 1, this is 2, and 4 plus 2 is 6i. So when we add two complex number, what we get is another complex number. Similarly, if we do the subtraction, so z is 3 plus 4i and w is minus 1 plus 2i. So z minus w, this is the real part, and the real part, there is a negative sign between the two. So 3 minus minus 1. This is the working for the real part. Similarly, the imaginary part plus sign in the middle, and this is 4i minus 2i. So overall, we are getting 3 minus minus 1, that is 4, and 4 minus 2, that is plus 2i. So we are getting another complex number, 4 plus 2i. So in this video, what we have studied so far is the basics of complex number. The basics of complex number started with square root of a negative number. We have defined square root of negative 1 as I. I stands for imaginary number. This symbol is known as iota. A complex number z is written as a plus bi. This is the real part. This is the imaginary part. When we talk about addition and subtraction, we follow the rule of algebra. The real is added to the real. Similarly, the imaginary is added to the imaginary part. Whatever is the rule for addition, that same rule applies for subtraction also.